Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. It is
Welcome.
it is our Friday Q&A session, a special Q&A session from Hank and I for from the Wizard Hank and I for this 60-day novel challenge and NaNoWriMo. This is a very cool event. We normally do a bi-weekly office hours for Dabble Premium members, but we've opened up the floodgates. We're doing these Q&A sessions every Friday. And since next Friday is a holiday, this is actually our last Q&A session of the month. I'm excited about it, Hank. How about you?
Oh, I'm always excited. One thing that I love about the live Q&A is it makes you think on your feet and
Hmm.
you know, and it's fun to think about story and um to realize that no matter where you are in the journey, you know more about story creation and storytelling than you might give yourself credit for.
Yeah.
Because as a species, we're a storytelling species. We all know what makes a good story. Of course,
Mhm.
there are things that help the process that you learn along the way, but we're all storytellers by nature. So it's fun to talk about it and to challenge yourself to dig out the things that you already know are good for storytelling.
Mhm. Yeah, and of all the events that we do, like
Yeah,
workshops, fireside chats, writing sprints, what have you, I think this might be my favorite format
yeah,
because it's just casual, it's laid back, we have a good time, we answer questions. So speaking of, if you have a question, please, please, please drop it in the chat. If
yeah.
you're watching this after the fact, leave a comment and we'll try to answer it either in a comment or in an upcoming Q&A session. But I should take some time to say hello, NJ and David and Paula and Jane and Todd and Lindsay, everyone that said hello to you. Um, so before we jump into the questions, I guess Hank, how is the book going? You're pretty dang close to 50,000 words, aren't you?
I'm pulling up right now 47,384 um with the addition of the words that I wrote during the writing sprint last hour. So
Nice.
pretty excited about where I am. We
Mhm.
have a lot going on this weekend and then um a lot family wise and then the holiday next Thursday obviously. So I've been really trying to get some extra words written in anticipation of things coming. I've
Mhm.
not always been that good in the past and I let the inevitable sneak up on me, but I've tried to do better this year and the daily writing sprints 100% have helped
Yeah.
and we have a writing marathon coming up this week, so pretty confident I'm going to hit my 50,000 words. And I'm pretty confident that I'm going to have my whole story told, um, not in a presentable fashion to show to anyone, obviously, but I'm really confident about the skeleton of my story
Mhm.
and some of the musculature. And then, it's going to be putting the skin on and dressing that. Boy, I'm just really mixing metaphors today. Just,
Yeah, like Buffalo Bill style.
right, right. So yeah, I'm really excited about the next stage of the process, and editing really scares a lot of people, but I'm looking forward to now that I've got really the bones of my story, and I feel like it's in good shape as far as story structure. Now's where the fun part comes, and really dressing it up, and really adding my voice to it, and adding the characters' voices to it.
Mhm.
That I've learned through this process. I've really learned who they are and what they sound like, and that. So the fun part is coming up.
Yeah. All right. Well, um, th- we have a couple of questions coming in,
Yeah.
and I think we should just jump
How's your
into those.
story coming, by the way?
It's
Where are
going.
you?
I am writing the midpoint scene as we speak, like during the writing sprints that we
Okay.
just had. I was writing it. Big old fight scene. I made a comment that I was glad I wasn't on stream because it is a gory fight scene. I write like it's very violent stuff, right?
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't hide that fact.
Yeah.
So it's good that I'm not on stream for that one. But I really built up our characters to think that they were going to escape, to think that everything was going well, and it's not. Things just took a hard
Mm,
turn for them. So I get to wrap up this scene. I am just like 150 words shy of 30,000 words. So I am still about 6,000 words behind, I believe. But I'm planning on making up some of that this weekend, a lot of it on Wednesday. And then, I'm for all those in the audience, I am the only Canadian on the Dabble team here. So my Thanksgiving was last month. So I don't have any family coming over next Thursday or Friday or the weekend. So I got some more time on my hands.
Are you still thankful though? Do you have some
Hank,
thankfulness
I'm
that can bleed
thankful
over to
every
this?
time we get to be on a live stream together.
See,
So
that's what I was hoping for, Doug. What I was hoping
all right, let's get into some characters here. Or not characters, some questions. Where are the characters? Where okay.
Right.
So NJ asks, and this is actually a pretty relevant question given, we're coming up to December now. I'm just now getting used to making more than one draft. How do you approach rewriting something you have written? What is your process with that? And before we answer, I'm going to push the boundaries on what Robert lets me say in live events and hint that there might be something in this realm that will be coming on next Friday, or Saturday. The big surprise Robert's talking about, maybe this has a little something to do with it. We'll see. But I will not answer any speculation. I will not answer any questions about that. That's the most I can say, and he's probably already getting mad at me if he hears this. So,
Be quiet, Doug.
Yeah. Hank, how do you approach rewriting something you've written, and what is your process? Let's say you just finished the first draft.
Okay,
What's the process?
My thinking or my process has evolved through the years. I used to believe that when you rewrote something, then you just started back at blank page and physically rewrote the book. Because I made the mistake of reading some old craft books, back from people when people were using typewriters, and you literally had to rewrite the book. you know, with software like Dabble or what word processors in general, that's not necessary anymore. I've talked about it before. I use this method that's kind of evolved for me over the last few years of onioning, where I take the passage that I've written, start at the top, and just go through it, and I find sections that I can either reword or add to or take away or whatever, and I just go from the top down to the bottom, and I'll do a couple of passes like that. And invariably, I will find a number of passages that I can reword. Sometimes it's just for better word choice. Maybe it's now that I've kind of been through it a couple of times, I realize I've got some redundancy there that I can clean up. I can, say things a different way. There's always detail that I can add for the world, or just to show the character's emotion in through action or through reflection on the world, or whatever it is. There's always things like that that can be added. And so that's kind of and I'll go through that process from top to bottom, and that'll be draft 2. And then I'll go through it again for my third draft, and I'm really, because I've cleaned up a lot of those things that are redundant, or I've added detail that needs to, then that third pass from top to bottom is really for story flow and for to look for little niggling mistakes of punctuation and things like that. Don't worry so much about punctuation on that first edit, because if you're adding or subtracting whole passages, punctuation is going to change anyway. So don't get caught up in that. If there are glaring errors that you can fix, go ahead and fix those things, because once you see an error so many times, your brain will just overlook it. So if it's something that's an obvious, just leaving off periods at the end of sentences, whatever, go ahead and fix those things. But yeah, I just take a step-by-step approach to it, and it's really just me going over. Now one thing that I have started doing, is I will, and under my manuscript um, in Dabble, I will create a new book under my existing one. Like right now, I've got under manuscript. The book is called Crossroad Blues, and I will create one under that. Just go to the manuscript and add new book, and I'll add Crossroad Blues version 2, and I'll copy everything from the original into version 2, and that way I have kind of a versioning process.
Hmm.
I have a way to go back and look at the way things began, a little bit like I've done in our writing sprints, or in this challenge period, where I've started using cross through a lot, so that I can see where my thought process was. I interviewed Cory Doctorow a number of years ago, a science fiction writer, and he talked about, with the invention of word processors, we have lost a lot of the paper trail of story creation. And he talked about this process that he had devised, where each day he backs up the writing that he's done, and he has versions of everything, so that he can look back and see where the story began. And we hear stories of authors, that J.R.R. Tolkien's second draft of The Hobbit resurfaces, and it's fun to just kind of see, where his thought process was.
Hmm.
And a lot of times when we go in with our word processor and we change those things, we lose some of the trail of that. So I've started kind of
Interesting.
making myself a trail, and sometimes I don't look back at it, but it's nice to have it there. I don't know for what reason. It gives me comfort to know that
Hmm.
I can see the evolution of a book, and
That's cool.
that's something I've
On
liked.
that note,
Yeah,
what I can share, one of the things I can share is that we are
yeah,
working in one of the upcoming patches next year of Dabble, to have versioning built in.
yes,
So
I'm excited about that.
save a bit of a headache there, but I like that idea, and it's a very interesting point, that we're losing that paper trail. Never thought of
Yeah,
it that way,
I
but
hadn't either until Cory Doctorow kind of peeled the layers of that back for me, and I started to realize uh, the importance of that, even if it's just for your family one day,
yeah,
that they can kind of, it's a fun little artifact of, you know, what was going on.
yeah. Now, for my own rewriting process, um, I mean, I feel like we could have a fireside chat and delve into each of our
Yeah.
processes for a whole hour. But for mine, I think it's similar to yours. And we've
Mhm.
discussed before how we normally each max out at like 3 revisions.
Yeah.
Though that's not always the case. Sometimes you'll have more.
Right.
Sometimes, rarely, I think you'll have less. But similar to you, I like to start big. You don't want to
Mhm.
be messing around with words if those words are going to be cut. That's just like an
Yes.
inefficient use of your time,
Right.
right? So I'll read it through the first time around. I'll actually try. I'll take a break. Let's actually start there. Take a break. Separate myself from the book. Like Stephen King said, you put it in a drawer, you walk away
Yeah.
for as long as you can. For me, that's probably a few weeks, and then I'm probably working on something else in the meantime. Let's be real. And then I come back and I'll read it basically as quickly as I can, the same way that I would read like a good book, because it is a good book, right? And that way I can digest as much of it as close together as possible to make sure, hey, is this a coherent story? Are the character arcs making sense? Are there like a Swiss cheese slice worth of plot holes in here? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I'll go through and I'll make notes, targeting probably specific things at a time. So I'll know what I noticed the first time around, and I'll target, okay, this character arc doesn't make sense, or something in the second act didn't work. So I'm gonna read through to make sure that all works, and then I'll go through again looking for the smaller details. Making sure the
Mhm.
characters are consistent, making sure that my prose is good, that kind of stuff, and then maybe one more time for spelling and grammar, and then just buffing up that prose even more. Getting nice, clean, and like well made prose is still something that takes me multiple passes. It does not, like, minus the handful of brilliant lines that come up every now and then. Like it's mostly simple prose at first that then gets
Yeah.
polished and refined, right? So that's my process. Start big, get smaller.
And
Don't worry about the granular stuff at first.
I used to hate the idea of editing. I think it goes back to the reason that a lot of people don't like outlining is because it puts them in the headspace of like 10th grade English, and it just doesn't feel very creative. But that's actually where most of my creativity comes in, because I've already got the bones of the story there. I've got a beginning, middle, and end to this chapter. It may not be pretty, but it's there. And now in the editing, I get to come in and really dress it up, and that's really where my creativity blossoms, is in those moments of I've got these two not really disjointed scenes, but they're kind of rough how they go from scene to scene. How can I really bridge this and make it um make it outstanding? And that's, if you approach it from that mindset of this is the time for your creativity to really shine, it really makes that part of the process fun.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people on that note get hung up on thinking that the creative part of writing is only in the writing. But you bring creativity to outlining, you bring creativity to writing, you bring creativity to revising, you bring creativity to the publishing part of it when you're thinking about covers and all that. So like there is creativity throughout this process. I think we just get tunnel visioned on what is arguably the most creative part, the
Right.
actual writing of it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist elsewhere. Paul is saying here they usually handwrite most of the stories instead of crossing out um, instead of crossing out stuff. Use a highlighter to make what is typed, and then keep the handwritten version. It's a great way of
Well,
physically
that's fun.
versioning things. Yeah, I like that. Okay, and then sorry, I do want to tack on an extra part to NJ's question here. Once you're done your revising, then you want to get external feedback as well.
Yeah.
And that external feedback comes in two buckets. You might want to get some writer's feedback so that they can help you with those more craft elements. But be aware that a lot of writers will insert their own style choices into their feedback, and that's not necessarily what you want all the time. However, if a writer says to you, this character arc doesn't make sense, maybe the character arc doesn't make sense. Um, then you also want reader feedback, and that's where we get into beta readers, where you're getting feedback from an external source, specifically from a reader's perspective. You don't want storycraft information there. You don't want to hear about, the character arcs and the themes and whatnot. You just want to know it's a good reading experience.
Right.
And then you take that feedback, you do another draft, maybe a second one if you want to be extra thorough, and then send it to a copy editor if you're self-publishing. If you're traditionally publishing, time to start querying.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not a short process, right? And
Yeah.
like we're writing a book in a month, or part of a book for a lot of people. But if your draft takes a year to write, it might take another year to revise and get ready for publication or submission.
Yeah.
And you can shorten that by dedicating more time to it, but just like writing, you don't want to burn yourself out. You need to make a sustainable schedule for revising. Plus,
Yeah.
you need to make room to continue to write, because as we say with frequency here, you should always be writing. It's the
Yep.
best way to advance your author career. And so when you're revising, you still, like, let's say you have an hour for writing time right now, maybe you split that up 50-50. You have half an hour for writing, half an hour for revising going forward.
Yeah.
But make sure you make time for writing.
If you listened to our show the other day with Scott Moon, he talked about the early days of his writing career when he was querying publishers with a manuscript, and he said, "I'm very much a rule follower," and folks would say, don't submit more than one thing to a publisher at a time. And he had a spreadsheet where he tracked who he had sent stuff to and what his responses were, and he had sent one manuscript and then followed up a few times a year with polite responses, just to kind of put it back in front of them. And one manuscript, he got final feedback on it 7 years later. Um, you know, And this is before the
It's
Kindle
audacious.
revolution and really the doors opening the way they have now for indie publishing and small press publishing and all of that. But it was 7 years. But you know what Scott did in that 7 years? He wrote more books. He
Of
kept
course.
working on his craft. He kept telling more stories because this one is finished. It's on submission. Got to always be writing. Got to always be working on something else. And all of those years woodshedding and really building that skill has most definitely paid off for him. But
Yeah.
it's a it's a process.
Yeah. All right. Next question. We touched on this a little bit yesterday during our 60-day show. Oh,
Can
yes.
I say one more thing that I just thought of
No.
before we move on? The challenge and writing a book in 30 days or writing 50,000 words. I've always approached this as uh, I project this book will be 80 to 90,000 words, so I'm going to write the first 50,000 words of that, and still have 30 to 40,000 words hanging out there that I've yet to write. This is the first time that I've approached this in the way that I'm going to write the entire book in November, even though it will be really just the bones of the book. It won't be
Mhm.
it. I'm going to have written from chapter 1 to chapter 30, and the story will be complete at the end of November. It won't be in its final form, but it will have been told all the way through. And now I get to go through. I know how the story is going to end. There are no questions hanging out there about what needs to be done after the fact and if the story is going to resolve completely or whatever. All those questions have been answered. Now I get to go in and just really beef up these chapters and make it all that it can be. And I'll tell you, I actually really love this process, and I think I'm going to do it again, even if it may not be in the constraints of a 30-day. I love the idea of telling the story completely, um, even though it's not at its final form.
Mhm.
It's really opened my eyes to some things that I'm going to really explore going forward. I just want to
Well,
say that.
that's great. No, and I think it's super relevant too because I think we both approach that answer from what a normal draft revision would look like if we had months to write it.
Right.
But if you're approaching a nano draft, then let's say your story did fall within the 50,000 words. You write it start to finish this month in that 50,000 word span. Part of your revision process is probably going to be adding more scenes and maybe entire chapters to
Right.
make your novel more fleshed out and more cohesive. And that may be your process. Like if you adopt that going forward for other books, for non-nano books, then that works out. But generally, like when I've written a draft, I I don't know if I've ever added more than like one or two scenes to a draft. I've
Mhm.
changed scenes dramatically. I've removed scenes, but rarely have I added scenes to any of the books that I've written. And I might be an outlier in that, so don't take that as gospel. But yeah, okay. All right. Great question, NJ.
Yeah.
Lindsay's up next. How do you know if the ending is satisfying for the reader? For context, I have multiple subplots going on in the story, and not all of them are tied up in the end. So again, we mentioned this yesterday,
Yeah.
but I think we can expand on it. Some are left open-ended for the next book, and Lindsay wants it to be a duology. So I'm afraid that it won't be completely satisfying for the reader to not have all of their questions answered.
They don't have to
Do
have all of their questions answered,
yes.
but make sure they have a question answered and make sure it's an important question. That's for you to decide, but you can absolutely leave things undone at the end of this book if you've given the reader something that is satisfying for them, a question that's answered, a mystery that is solved, someone that's rescued. You can have other people that are not rescued, but they need to have some hope at the end of this book and know that you will resolve things for them later.
Yeah.
That's my take on it. What about you?
Well, for any series, whether it be a duology with two books or I don't know, a septology. What is 7 books? If it's 7 books long, say it's 20 books long.
Yeah,
There is going to be a bigger story that's spread between the books.
right.
But each book will be their own story. And each book will have their own main plot line and main conflict and main internal conflict for your protagonist. So as long as you've answered the questions for the main plot and conflicts in your book, you can leave things open for the next one. It almost wouldn't make sense to me to have everything closed off at the end of a book if it has a sequel. What's the point in them reading the next book then? They're going to assume that everything's done. So you need a few of those teasers. But you should also be aware that, let's say you introduce 6 plot threads in your first book. If you only close off one of them, then maybe that's too much for a sequel, and people will feel unsatisfied with that. So I don't know if it's fair to say close off more threads or tie off more threads than you leave open, because that might not be the case, but just be aware of how many you're leaving open relative to how many you opened up to begin with. But make sure that main one is tied off.
Yeah.
And then I also would say outside feedback. Get outside feedback on it. This is where beta readers really come in to play, because a writer might tell you, yeah, I love leaving a million threads for the next book. But if, you get 5 beta readers and 4 of them say this feels unsatisfying, then you have your answer, right?
Yeah. And if you're an author that has built a big following on a long running series, I'm first person that comes to mind is Richard Fox with his Ember War series. It's like 20 books. And when you get to book 14 or something and you're selling hundreds of thousands of copies of each of these, I think your readers have agreed to go along for the ride with you. And there are certain expectations, and you can get away with a lot more because you've built that those people that are along with you for the ride. If this is your first series that you're writing, you have to earn that trust from your readers. So you have to make sure that you're delivering on promises, and you are not to say some of these longer running series are not delivering on their promises. I'm just saying that you have to build that relationship with your readers and earn that trust. And then when you have earned that trust, and you know that there's a certain segment of your readership that's going to go along with you for subsequent books, maybe you have the freedom to stretch that out a bit, or to introduce more subplots that don't get resolved. It's all about that relationship between the writer and the reader.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next here. All right, Megbert, my fellow Canadian. Don't think I didn't see that comment. Awesome. I always want to call that out. Megbert will be reading an excerpt of their book to an audience on Sunday. Congratulations. That's awesome. That's such a cool experience. When you're doing a reading to tease an audience, what are your recommendations? Do you just read chapter 1, or a piece of the beginning, or a piece of the beginning of the conflict, or a big old question maybe, or is this just a big old question? Anyway, I have done only a couple readings in my author career, mostly because the majority of my readers are in the States, and I'm in Canada. So I do have some folks around here, but I also don't live in Toronto. So, most of the population is not near me. And on top of that, I write dark fantasy. It's not like I'm whipping out a very profound, sentimental moment that'll make people cry in the audience or something, right? That said, I think any of the things that you've put here are valid choices. So you can start with chapter 1, because ideally your chapter 1 should be a great hook. Your opening should be very impactful, and it should get people excited. But you can also choose something that does have more of a deeper meaning behind it, is more eloquently written, and gets people really emotionally involved in something. That, again, just for me, because mine are more actiony, they're more horror, they're gruesome.
Sorry.
That's okay. That, like, I also sometimes focus on something that is a little creepier or a little more thrilling, because that might be my audience. but
Yeah.
I don't tend to have the more sentimental or emotionally driven lines that I can just pull out as an excerpt.
Yeah. Um, I agree with that. I've done it a few times. I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've ever just started with chapter 1. Uh, in the book I'm writing right now, I have a prologue that is takes place like 45 years in the past, and it really has nothing to do, or it seems like it has nothing to do with the story that I'm telling, but later you start learning that this is kind of a setup for what's happening. And uh, so the prologue is not imperative to the story, but it definitely adds context and flavor to it. And I think if I was doing a read, I think I would start with the prologue in this one, just because it's kind of mysterious and it really sets a vibe. Um, and another time I wrote a story about a time traveler, and I picked one little vignette out of there from where he was uh, popped into a scenario, and it was very awkward, and it was just a fun. Um, I say look for moments of intrigue, um, because ultimately what you want to do when you're having a reading is for someone to go, "Oh, this is really awesome. I really want to read that book. I have no idea what the context is around this passage that I heard, but I really want to read it now." So look for those kind of moments in your book, and isolate a couple of pages.
Hmm. Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way to do it at all. It just depends on your audience and the subject matter, and
And lean into your strengths. Like,
yeah.
if you are really good at writing a setting description, like world building,
Right,
lean
right.
into that, because that's what people are going to be there to hear.
Yeah,
If you're a romance author and you're really good at writing a really like romantic scene, maybe not a steamy scene for a public reading, but a romantic scene that really gets the heartstrings pulled, then go for that. Like, whatever you're best at, lean into that.
yeah,
Okay. Thank you for the great question.
yeah. Can I pick one?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
NJ, what are your feelings on prologues and epilogues? When do you use them? When do you avoid them? Um, Prologues, for some reason, are something that people are very passionate about, one way or the other. Um, I I personally think that prologues can be useful. Um, and I do think that it needs to be separate from your main story, but connected. What you don't want to do is have a prologue that really should just be a chapter one. It should feel different than your chapter one. It may be separated by time, maybe separated by characters, and the thing that you're telling will ultimately um, become evident later in the story as you weave in this character, but maybe the reader doesn't know who this character is yet. Find a way that to tell a separate part of the story, and that then in that way prologues can be very useful. What you don't want to do, like I said, is just it be what should be chapter one. If you're telling uh the same sort of the same time period of the story with the same characters, there's no reason to separate that as a prologue. Have it be something different. Epilogues are not something that I have used. I don't think I've ever used an epilogue, um, because to me, a lot of times the epilogue is just the denouement, the kind of the breathing at the end of a story. Unless, like prologues, you're telling uh, a separate part of the story with a different character, and a lot of times that's like we were talking yesterday, the after credit scenes in a Marvel movie,
Hmm.
that it doesn't seem to fit here, but it's giving an Easter egg for something that will come in the next book, maybe. I'm trying to think like in a standalone where an epilogue would be a good use, and I'm drawing a blank right now. Do you have anything?
I think the best way to treat it is like a little Easter egg or bonus content. Because something to keep
Yeah.
in mind is that there are readers and a sizable number of readers who will skip prologues and epilogues.
Yes.
Because
I've never understood that.
I kind of get it, because we've gotten to this point where authors more or less understand that prologues shouldn't be mission critical to
Yeah.
understanding the story or the characters, right? They are almost that bonus content. And same thing with an epilogue. If the epilogue is wrapping up like your character's new ordinary world, then it's just another chapter. It's not an epilogue. If the prologue is just introducing your character at the right time and place to start your story, it's not a prologue. It's just chapter one. So personally, I wouldn't skip it, because I assume the authors included it for a reason. But there are
Right.
people who will skip it.
Right.
So yeah,
Unless an author has proven to be untrustworthy and that they're just padding things out, and if that's the case, why am I reading their book to begin with?
yeah,
I'm assuming if they included a prologue, it's important. Yeah,
yeah.
I may not realize it's important right now, but if the author took the time to give me information, he or she meant to do that for a reason. And
Yeah.
maybe I'm just too trusting of authors. They're shifty characters.
So I wrote an article, and I'll share the link in a second here, about when to write a prologue. And I think you can translate this to an epilogue as needed, but I included the 3 tenets of a good prologue. And the first one is that it contributes to a better understanding of your plot. So it's not mission critical to the plot, but if someone reads it, they get a little nugget or two that makes them go, "Oh, okay, that makes sense."
Right.
Right? Maybe they better understand the other side of a war or something like that. It can't be weaved into your story without diluting your plot. So that means that if you were to take the information you present in your prologue and you can put it in your story, but it makes your story worse, then it can fit in a prologue. That's fine. But if you were to spread it out and it made your story worse or more diluted, you don't want to do that. So plug it in the front. And then the last one is that it enhances the reader experience without being mandatory. And that just speaks to what we were just talking about. Is that if it is skipped, the reader will still understand the story. So no mission critical information. So yeah, here. Let me okay. That's what I'm looking for. The link there. Oh, I added a backslash on the end when oh no, I didn't. I thought I hit an extra slash when I hit enter there, but we're good to go. All right. Can I pick a question now, Hank?
I guess.
Okay, there has been a little bit of discussion in the chat about Ginger's question. That I think Ginger was asked for it to be dropped because I think people were misconstruing it. But how long should
Yeah.
it take to read through a 50K word draft? And I believe this was in reference to the revision phase. And I just want to scroll through and make sure that was the case, because a lot of people answered, it depends on the reader. You read at your own
Right.
pace, and so on and so forth. In terms of revising a 50,000 word draft, like that first read through to get the vibes of it, perfect. Then you want to do it as quickly as possible. Now,
Right.
to lean into what other people said, it matters how quickly you can read, and you can gauge that on your own. But what I suggest is trying to do it within the span of a week, if possible. And you might have to
Mhm.
go and block out time in your calendar the same way we did for writing this month. Because the faster you can get it done, the better you're going to be able to process the whole thing as a big picture.
Yeah.
If you can get it done in like a weekend, great. But like 5 days doing it, let's say you can read, I don't know, 2,500 words, that's 10 pages in an hour, then 50,000 words is going to be 20 hours of reading. Spread that out across a week, that's less than 3 hours a day. So that's no small feat, right?
Right.
And you might read faster than that, especially if you're not reading for note taking, you're not reading for specific things in revising, you're just reading to read it. You very well could read faster than that, but
Yeah.
use that as a gauge. Aim for a week, I'd say,
Yeah.
for the first one. All right.
And you can
You can pick.
always, like if you're doing like I am and going from the top of your chapter to the bottom and adding, you're reading through it, but you're also revising at the same time. So you're kind of doing double duty. and after you've done that a couple of times and you feel like that you've got a fairly clean draft, and you're just looking for little things, use Dabble's read to me feature, and
Mhm.
and let it read to you, and you'll hear things that you'll never see, and that's a handy tool.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, I guess we should have mentioned that in the revision process as well.
Yeah.
Reading it out loud is a great idea because you will skim over things with
Yes.
your eyes that your ears will catch. So
Yep.
include that when possible. Thanks for the good question, Ginger.
Yeah.
All right, Hank, your turn this time.
Okay. Okay. Here's another one from NJ. If you have more than one book, like a series, is it a good idea to continue writing the second or third while your first is going through editing or beta readers? Yes, I would say yes. Um,
I would say yes with an asterisk, but we can.
yes, yeah. If you are confident that the subject matter of your first book is not going to change. Now, if you're going through beta readers or editing, they're going to be slight changes that happen, a lot of grammar, punctuation, but that shouldn't change the overall arc of your story. And if you're worried about the overall all arc of your story, maybe get that really nailed down before you start on two or three, because there could be repercussions that for how
Yeah.
the story evolves in the next phases. Maybe add your beta readers earlier in your process. Maybe you have sensitivity readers that you're utilizing if you're writing a character that you're not confident that you're really nailing correctly. Maybe add those types of input from outside voices earlier in your process. Make sure you have those things nailed down. Once you're confident that the structure of your story is not going to change, then start on books two or three. And then your editing process, your proofreading, and that uh, sort of thing absolutely can be going on while you work on books two and three. What
Yeah.
say you, editor Doug?
Well, I'd say mostly the same thing. You can get outside feedback while on your first book while writing book two. And if you're already in book three, I mean, more power to you. Maybe you're taking too much time on the revisions if you're already two
Mm,
books ahead at
yeah,
that point. The only thing I would say is that be prepared to change potentially big parts of your sequel if you're still waiting on feedback. Like you might end up removing a character or opening up a new plot line or arc or something that you then need to incorporate. So be prepared to do that if you go this route. The only time I would say don't do this is if you're working with a developmental or structural editor on your first book. Now, they come in earlier in the process and they'll help you with the story itself, the big picture, the character arcs, the world building, that kind of thing. They're like more like a writing partner than like a line editor or a copy editor. If you're working with one of those, then I wouldn't race ahead with book two and three because
yeah,
you're going to be workshopping with them to fully map out what's happening in your
right.
story. But otherwise, yeah, I think you're safe to go ahead.
And if you're and this is an evolving thought as I'm speaking it, so you know this may not be worth anything, but if you if you're working on a series, if you have a trusted confidant, maybe another author, or maybe an author's not maybe not the best person. If you've got someone that you trust that you could share your outlines with, just to say, okay, this is what I'm thinking for book one. This is kind of my main conflict. This is my resolution. These are some things that will happen. Um, just so that you could get an idea of the big picture items of your story before um, locking that in. If you have a voice like that that you could rely on, utilize those people that can help you spot those things before you invest a bunch of time in writing something that doesn't work, or and then you can spot some of those issues for book two and three earlier in the process. That's just something that may work for you.
Yeah. I want to pivot over to something that Paula asked, and B
I
helped
saw
us
that
out.
too.
Um, But how does Dabble read to you? I'll show you.
Yeah.
He already explained it, but I'm gonna share my screen just so you can all see.
Yeah.
Now, the thing I will add onto here is that read to me and the thesaurus, which are both word tools, are part of the premium tier of Dabble. So in addition to the workshops and office hours that we normally run and extra resources and newsletters, this is something that is part of the premium tier. So if you aren't in Dabble Premium, you won't have access to this. But let me show you. That's me. Okay, so can we see my screen all right? Yes.
Yep.
Can we see my mouse? We can. Okay, so on the left here, we have goals and stats, notes, comment history, word tools. And so you have the thesaurus. So, if I highlighted that,
Did you
then
say on the left here?
did I say on the left?
You did. It's on the
It's
right.
it's backwards in Canada.
Yeah.
No, on the right. My apologies. My apologies. On the right.
Yeah.
So you have your thesaurus, but you have the read to me down here. Right now, we use the Microsoft voices, but I do think we're working sometime next year to get different voices in there as well.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And then you can start it there. I don't know if you can you hear that even? I
No.
don't think so. I don't think I'm sharing my audio, but it
Yeah.
reads through it. And then, as mentioned, you can control the speed down there, as represented by the tortoise and the hare. So
Yeah.
it is helpful because reading your own stuff can be painful and honestly a strain on your voice. but yeah, it can help you identify things
Yeah.
that you may not notice before.
And to refer back to our show with Scott the other day, he said that that's a feature that he utilizes as kind of one of his last proofreading processes to hear how it how it sounds, and he all the time picks up little things
Yep.
to edit.
Yeah.
It just activates
Shelley,
a different part of your brain.
Shelly asked what happens to my work on Dabble if my subscription lapses, and I'm like 99% sure I know the answer, but I've just sent a message to our devs to 100% confirm the answer before. Okay, yeah, there it is. So,
Yep, there's the answer. I
yeah,
saw it.
you can you can view it and export it, but you cannot make any changes on
Yeah.
it. So your work is always yours. We don't, if your subscription expires, we don't say, you can't have this because it is your work. We don't want to keep that from you ever.
Yeah.
But you can look at it, you can export it to Word or Google Docs or a text document. You just can't change it. All right. Did you pick the last question? No, I picked the last question. So
Oh, shoot.
I saw a good one in here that I don't know if I flagged.
Yeah. So much good conversation has been happening in the chat. Thank you all for the amazing community that we've experienced this month. You all have made it such a pleasure to show up every day, and
even though Hank's hiding behind a blur now.
Oh.
Here, I got one.
Okay, go ahead.
So,
fix my camera.
B asked, does anyone have any descriptive issues when writing? You write and don't describe stuff. And then Megbert came in after and said, I'm hoping to go into more description when editing. From a previous Q&A, the folks gave great advice of starting with telling to get it on paper and to edit it to show afterwards, of referencing that show don't tell rule that we try and stick with whenever possible to buff up our writing. Hank, what are your thoughts on this? How descriptive are you when you write?
Like I've alluded to, not very descriptive in the beginning, but that's my editing process is about adding description. So starting with telling to get it on paper and then edit show afterwards. Yeah, that there's no right or wrong answer. Some days you just feel the story more, and it's easier to go into that. Some days it's a chore, so you get the bones of the story down, knowing you can come back later, and that's a great brain hack when you're not feeling it. Well, you can say, well, I know what I need to accomplish here. It doesn't have to be good. I just need to know that I get it. I can come back tomorrow and dress it up, and that's been a a big help for me. So, um, my current process is I don't worry about descriptions so much in the first draft, but I come back later and I add that. And coming back with fresh eyes uh, and a fresh mind helps me to be more creative with description. And I always find stuff that even though I felt like when I was first drafting it that there's nothing more I can add here, there's always more you can add there when you come back with fresh eyes. So that's all I would add to that.
Yeah. I think for me, it almost goes both ways sometimes.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll really embrace like my inner Cormac McCarthy or Adam Neville
Mm,
or Robert Jordan and just spend a page describing something that really doesn't need a page. And so then I'll have to go back and I'll trim it up and I'll make it more succinct. Or I
yeah.
won't. Sometimes I just leave it long, right? If I
Yeah.
think that sounds good. Um, Other times I'll like I'm aware, especially during writing sprints, I use really weak adverbs, especially
Mhm.
to describe something, and I'll say to myself, "Ugh, like that's bad,"
Yeah.
and but I know that when I go to revise it, I'm gonna catch a lot of those, and it's just
Yeah.
gonna sound better. But when we're
Right.
drafting, especially when we're drafting quickly, like this month, no, I don't. I don't worry about the amount of detail I'm adding. If it comes naturally, excellent. If it doesn't, I'm moving on. I'll get it
Yep.
when we revise.
Yep. And a lot of times those weak adverbs and things are all you need to leave yourself a note.
Yes.
Because think of it in terms of I'm not using weak adverbs here in my writing. I'm leaving a note for myself because when I come back later, I'll know what I meant there. I just didn't have time to fully flesh out that idea. But I've left myself a note. I know what I was thinking. Now I can build upon that. And if you think in those terms, you're giving yourself permission to write weekly, but and WEAKLEY or LY. But you're using that as a place to tell yourself, your future self, what you really mean to say,
Yeah.
and that gives you the freedom to not get bogged down in those things as you're writing.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. There are two questions that I want to tackle next, if you're okay with that. First, JM Brown's here, and then we're going to go to Paula's. But JM Brown asking, how do you go about getting beta readers? My book is a young adult dystopian fantasy. I thought about going to school district English teachers. I'm a substitute teacher. Uh, I'm going to, at the risk of copping out, I'm dropping an article from Dabble, written by the wonderful Abby, that is all about how to find beta readers. And you're going to get some advice in the chat here, like B's dropping some good advice. Yeah, leverage your network, leverage your friends, look to communities like the Storycraft Cafe. Uh,
Yes.
Writers tend to really love being beta readers, especially if you reciprocate that. I always say make sure that your beta readers are approaching it from a reader perspective. So it's not
Yes.
bad to have writers as beta readers as long as they know what their expectations are.
Yeah.
So,
Because the problem with other writers a lot of times that they'll give you feedback of how they would have told the story.
yeah,
You're not always interested in how they would tell the story. You just need to know,
yeah,
does my story work? And um, but sometimes you need that feedback from a writer that says, I would have told it this way because your way doesn't work.
yeah,
Sometimes you need to hear that. But
yeah,
most of the time you want to get a reader's perspective because they're the ones that matter anyway. They're the ones going to be buying your book. Other writers, not the best customer for your books.
yeah, yeah.
That's a
Other
hard
writers
reality.
best for like critique partners
Yeah.
and writing groups and whatnot. For beta, like for my beta readers, I use a bunch of my friends who read fantasy and dark fantasy.
Mhm.
And some people who weren't my friends when they were beta readers, but they are my friends now because I've used them so often. But you really want readers who read your genre and understand and enjoy
Yeah.
your genre. If you do go to writers, again, make sure they are in your genre as well. I would never ask like a historical fiction author to beta read for me because that's just what am I gaining out of that, and am I just wasting their time and expertise?
Right. Right.
Okay, and then I want to touch on Paula's before we go to
Okay.
another one. Paula asked yesterday during the 60 Days show, how do you know when you're at the climax? And we gave a couple answers, I think, or we touched on it a little bit. But I really want to. Well, first, Hank, do you have anything you want to say for this?
I was thinking about this. I I almost always think about the ending of my story from the beginning. I almost always know how that final chapter is going to go. I know the emotional resonance that I'm shooting for. I know uh, kind of the big problem that I want to solve. So I'm always thinking about that. So if you're thinking about the ending from the beginning, the climax is kind of your goal all along. So it's easy to spot. If you're pantsing it and you don't understand your ending, and a lot of people write that way, and that's totally valid. Um, the it might be more difficult, and you're having to weigh um, the emotional impact or the whatever the impact is for your story. You kind of having to weigh that in real time. Um, and this is a part that you have to be careful of because someone like Stephen King um, has been criticized a lot in the past for his endings, how they just kind of run out of gas, to the point that he had a cameo in It. I think it was It Part Two, where he was a bookseller and he had a Stephen King book, and he said, "Ah, his endings kind of stink." Um, it's it's a fact. But my advice would be to think about the ending from the beginning so that you understand where your climax is and you have something you're shooting for. Um, what about you, Doug?
Well, I was thinking, if I remember correctly, Paula, and correct me if I'm wrong, um, your character moves through different dimensions where magic functions differently, and they are getting pursued because of a way that they're using magic in their dimension that they're not supposed to. So they end up in this other dimension for a year, I believe you said before they go back to their home one. Just from that description and not knowing much more else about your book, it sounds like the main external conflict is them being pursued because of their magic or what have you. And so when they end up in this other dimension, they have to get home at some point. And odds are there's going to be this big conflict that tries to stop them from getting home. The ending has always been he's going home. So how does he get home? Right?
Yeah,
If something has stopped him from going home before, he needs to overcome that. Odds are that's going to be your climax. Because the odds are there's going to be some big obstacle preventing him from doing that, and something had to have changed in order for him to go home. Something that changed in him and around him. So he breaks through the baddie stopping him because he's learned something about himself or because he's grown in some way. I think that's how you're going to find your climax. Um, Something needs to change. There needs to be a change in this character in order for them to achieve the thing that they want, which is going home, it sounds like. So, what is that change? How does that manifest? When that manifests and when they overcome their biggest obstacle, that's your climax.
right, right.
I hope that helped. It's really hard to diagnose in this format something so specific.
Yeah,
But I really hope that helped. You can also ask in the Storycraft Cafe. You can provide more details. People can get a little more into it,
yeah.
but we have some limitations here.
And use tools like the plot grid in Dabble, or even a piece of paper and draw it out. Um, kind of the elements of your story, and see if you can detect the ebb and flow, the rise and fall of action, and see if you can uh, kind of come to the climax by getting a visual representation of your story. That very much helps me. I'm very much a visual person, and
Mhm.
kind of seeing it laid out like that helps me a lot.
Yeah. And Paula says that we helped out there, so I'm glad because I was thinking
Great,
about that
great.
during while I was making dinner last night. Okay, we're about to hit the hour mark, so if you can't stick around with us, we appreciate that you've been here and have asked questions and participated or just listened. But Hank, do you want to hang around for a little bit longer? We have a couple more questions that have
Sure,
been
sure.
asked.
Let's hit it.
All right. Okay, how about we go to B?
Okay.
I hit the goal for the month, but I'm worried about how big this thing is turning out to be. How do you split up something that goes insanely large? Now, I don't know if I'm completely understanding this question right, in that you've hit your 50,000 words for the month. Awesome. But your book's going to be 100,000 words or 80,000 words or 150,000 words.
Yeah.
How do you split up? How do you get to that end point when you're, only 50,000 words in right now? That's how I'm understanding this question, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Is that how you interpret it, Hank?
Well, B said it's my memoirs. I'm at
Yeah, 72,000.
72,000. Okay. Um, I think a memoir is perfectly fine to be upwards of 100,000 words. That roughly translates to 400 printed pages. Um, here's the thing about memoir. Memoir differs from like autobiography in a way. An autobiography is typically from cradle to grave. You're telling a person's whole story. A memoir is usually a window into a time or event. For instance, I'm thinking of trying to grab a good example. Maybe someone is an actor in Hollywood and they're telling does William Shatner. This may be a terrible example, but William Shatner wrote a series of books about his experiences on the Star Trek movie series, and I think he wrote 3 or 4 of them. And in each, it was a memoir of the making of that movie, and it encapsulated that movie. There was a little bit of information leading up to it, a little bit after, but the majority of the story was you're looking through the window of that particular film.
Mhm.
Whereas his autobiography would be telling the story of his parents and how he was born, and all the whole story. So you could think of it like that if you want to break it up into smaller segments and focus on a particular part of your story, and that could be a multi-volume memoir. That's one way you could handle it.
Mhm.
If you're seeing that this is going to be your whole life story, um, yeah, okay. So autobiography is a better name, as you
Yeah,
just
because
said.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say
it-
B says that she's 66 now and in my 20s at the 72,000 word mark.
Yeah, that's
So,
autobiography.
yeah.
Or it's a series of memoirs that are more isolated, and I like that analogy, and it may help you of we're looking through a window at a specific event or period of time.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, a series of memoir might be fine, or one whole autobiography, and it can even be multiple volumes as long as you have a defined uh, time period for each. So
Yeah. So I
it's a
would
little
say,
convoluted, but I hope it helped.
yeah, I would say for memoirs, I think now that we've landed on autobiography, I just want to say that memoirs are creative nonfiction. They are books
Yes.
based on real life, but they are just like any other fictional book in that they have a plot, and
Yes.
they have like a story they're trying to tell. So when Hank, your main character, who isn't the immortal one, this is
Right.
just a snippet of his life, right? It is not
Yes.
his entire life. So same thing. Memoirs are snippets.
Yeah.
Um, so for B, an autobiography, I think Paula has it right. Maybe do it by decade or break it up
Yep.
into some kind of chronological period, maybe
Yeah.
some, a certain event to event, and make it
Mhm.
into a series. I know B, you're saying that you want your kids to know all of your stories. And you're dictating, right? So I think that's all getting down quite quickly, which is nice. The alternative is, well, I don't know, like if you're doing this for your kids, you don't necessarily need to think about things like plot structure or arcs,
Yeah.
right? Which autobiographies don't tend to deal with anyway. They're just recountings of lives. So yeah, just keep going then. You don't have a limit. If this is for family and if this is for something important like making sure they know the stories of your lives, don't stress about word count.
Yeah.
Just just keep going.
Yeah. I agree.
And then maybe as you go, like it might be that they're seeing first drafts. Maybe do chunk it out by decade. Say, hey, here are the stories of my 20s, and then while you're writing / dictating your 30s, they're reading about your 20s. Like
Yeah.
maybe leapfrog it like that. I think that would be a cool thing to do.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. And good luck with
Oh,
that, B. That's a
yeah,
tremendous gift, that you leave your kids.
yeah, yeah. I think a lot more people wish that they got stories out of people
Yes.
when they could. So that's really cool. Good for
Yeah.
you.
Uh,
Paula asked a follow up to the climax question. How many words after the climax should you go? Only as many as necessary, in
yeah.
my opinion. I tend to do 1, maybe 2 chapters after the climax just to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Um, if you go too long, it's going to drag out and you're no longer working towards something. So, what's the point of the story at this point? Really, you're just establishing where the characters are after their world has changed, and then you leave the reader there.
Yeah. We had a pretty good discussion about this yesterday in our show with Josh, and
Yeah.
we talked about a couple of examples where I think we were using one of the Marvel movies as an example of a story that just ends on the climax. There
Infinity
is no
War.
after
Yeah.
story, and so yeah, it like Doug said, as little as possible, um, but whatever the story deserves.
Yeah. Erica asked, when I made my outline, it went into a book too. I didn't finish the outline though before I started writing the first book. Is that normal or not recommended? I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all.
No, no,
You started outlining something that's not going to be in this book, so you're just ahead of the game when you go to outline book 2. I think
yeah,
Erica also said in a follow-up comment that they've never outlined before, so this is all brand new. But no, I think you can just pick up from where you left off. And the benefit to outlining part of book 2 is that you have an idea of where the characters are going after the climax and the falling action. So you can even think about that to an extent as you're writing. You have a little bit more knowledge or forethought to work with, I guess.
yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with it at all.
Jim Butcher, who writes the Dresden Files books, tells the story about that he was in a creative writing class, and his teacher told him that he needed to outline um, his story. So he went home and wrote out like a 25 book outline and brought it back to her and said, "Okay, here I am." And she was like, dial it back a little bit. Let's start with book one. And and I asked him, well, how detailed are we talking about? He said, it was a little more detailed than you wanted it to be. It was a little, bordering on psychotic. But I do like the idea of if you're starting a trilogy per se, that you have big ideas that you kind of sketch out, and that you're not beholden to, but at least you understand this is like in the same terms we talk about in a book. You want to have a beginning, middle, and end, and you want to have a satisfying end. Um, think of that trilogy in the same way. There's the beginning, the middle, and the end, and then identify sub um, beginning, middle, and ends for each one there. And maybe if you can think in those terms, just very high level, um, so that then you can outline book one and you have a little bit for book two and a little bit for book three, but then that gives you the freedom that events that happen in book one can still be changed in your outline in book two while still kind of maintaining the integrity of the trilogy of the big structure. And leave yourself some fluid room for books 2 and 3. I kind of like the idea of not nailing down exact outlines on those, but understanding the big picture things that need to happen, because there will always be things that pop up in the writing of book 1 that you want to add to book 2. And if you're dealing with a rigid outline for book 2 before you finish book 1, you don't have the freedom to weave in some of those other things that are discovered in the writing.
Yeah. I like thinking of an outline for a series as like a graph where the closer you are to where you're at, like book 1 is high, and then the amount of outlining you do just falls down and down. And you still have
Yeah.
some because you know how the overall story goes. But even that can change. right? That is malleable, that is subject to change. But the farther away it is, so let's say you're writing a 7-book series, I think it is safer to outline more of book 2 when you're still working on book 1 than it is to outline basically anything of book 7 beyond the broad strokes that have to happen for this larger story. And then once you write book 2, then you can outline more of book 3 and a little bit more of book 4. And then when as you get closer, you can outline more and more. But like you said, you need to leave yourself room to discover and to write to new places. And then what you can do is once you start writing and you start discovering these new things and these new subplots, then you go and you can plop those into a series outline. And then you can start making those work as you come up with new things, so that when you introduce new things in one book, you can make sure that they are eventually tied off or relevant to the larger story.
Yeah.
Lindsay, just my world building document is 34 pages. That's pretty good.
You just tickled Doug's soul with that.
Yeah. I've said it before and I've said it again. If I could just get paid to world build with people, I would do that in a heartbeat. I'd still come on to shows every now and then. Okay. And then I think one more question we'll get from NJ here.
Okay.
How do you go about advertising self-published works? This is a big question, but I think we'll hit some highlights and hopefully be done in the next 4 minutes or so. Okay, let's finish the sentence. I have trouble advertising my first novella from 2020. I was learning the process at the time. That's very normal, I think, and the same goes with my first book. Right, it came out in 2019, maybe, and I didn't know what I was doing. I had zero idea. I just published it, and I hope for the best, and hoping for the best doesn't actually generate sales. So there's a couple ways you can go about this. We've talked about this one thing pretty extensively, but our go-to evergreen marketing tool for indie authors is your email list. If you haven't started building it, start building it now, especially, quite frankly, if it's your novella from 2020. A novella is a great thing to give away for free in exchange for an email on your email list. It's one of the best ways to build it. It gives people enough of you that they get hooked, but it's not 150,000 words of your time and energy that you're just giving away. So that's what I'm doing with this challenge. The book I'm writing is a novella, and I plan on using it for my email marketing list. And then you email them once a week, or not once a week, once a month. Once a month, just update how things are going, maybe some reading recommendations, some bonus content if you have that, things that your readers will find interesting. And then as you get closer to another release, you start teasing the cover, you start teasing the description, give a character profile or something, and then boom, release day or pre-sales up, then go, order it, pre-order it, release day. Excellent. Yeah. That's Dee's asking to please explain an email list better. Do you want to, Hank? Because I think I just spoke a lot.
Don't we have a great Dabble article about building a
we actually don't. That is something I'm working on for Dabble Premium, but I don't think we actually have a Dabble article on email marketing.
Okay. So your email list, and there are lots of ways that you can handle this. There are I'm drawing a blank. Who are the email list providers that
like MailChimp, MailerLite,
MailChimp. Yeah, I was thinking SurveyMonkey. That was MailChimp is what I was trying to grab.
And things like Squarespace have it built in now, so you don't even need a third-party one.
Sorry, right, and there are little forms that you can create that'll pop up on your website and things like that. And you have people sign up, and you can then generate this list that you can then send newsletters occasionally. Don't spam people, but occasionally when you have something to say or something to promote, and think of ways to integrate a fun email that people are not annoyed by. It's a way for you to stay in contact with your readers or people that care about what you do. There are also Amazon ads and Facebook ads, and those things change so often that you really need to kind of be plugged into what's going on there to know what's effective. But the thing that is evergreen and always uh, is sustainable is your email list. And we can go into more detail on this. Maybe we do a fireside chat about this,
Yeah, I
Doug,
think
where
so.
we can kind of dig into this more in successful ways. Um, Another thing, you can search for podcasts, search wherever you find podcasts or YouTube and look for people that talk about books and send them a nice email with an introduction to who you are, what your work is about, what you might have to bring that would make for a fun conversation. And then that's a way to expose yourself to a new audience, and then make sure that you have that email sign up on your website when you go guest on this podcast, so that when people come visit you, you can collect their email addresses. There's just lots of little organic things that you can do that you don't have to spend a lot of money on, but you really kind of have to work the system. And I think Doug and I will do a show um, on this soon, because there's a lot to say about this, and it's really unfair to try to just hit this
In
in
a
2 or
couple
3
minutes.
minutes. Yeah, I'm so scared I'm gonna say something wrong, but there's a lot to it, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. Just
Yeah,
because there's a lot to something doesn't mean it's unattainable. It's
yeah,
just one of these things that you just kinda have to work at.
yeah. What I do want to do real quick is we had Sarah Cannon on to do a
Yeah.
workshop on Tuesday, right?
Yes.
Um, I'm going to share her website real quick.
Yep.
So this is her website. Okay, you can see my cursor. So it's a great website, and
Yeah.
I did a workshop on author websites for Dabble Premium members, and I wish I had highlighted this because this is basically all you need for an author website. But you'll see here on her little header image, color's all good, and here you have two buttons: join the coven and view the books. This brings you to her books page, right? And this will, if it loads, I think my internet doesn't like sharing the screen and my stream at the same time. So that's her books, right? But join the coven. This is her newsletter list, her email list. So we go here. She gives a little blurb, and then Sarah's witchy newsletter. It has a theme. She writes spooky witchy stuff. So you join the newsletter. You give her your email. In exchange, you might get an excerpt from one of her books. You might get a novella. I'm going to stop sharing because I think my internet's not liking it a lot. You get her maybe a novella, but then you'll get regular updates the same way you would signing up for an email for anyone else, right? And that's what we're talking about. So
I'm I've got something that I want to show if I can.
yeah.
Um,
As you're pulling that up, I will
yep.
just add the only other thing that's better than an email news or email list for an author is, as we said before, always be writing. The more
Yes.
you have for people to consume, the more people will consume once they
Yeah.
find you.
And this is something that Hugh Howey used to talk a lot about in the early days of indie publishing. That he said that he was so thankful that he uh, got recognized when he had already published like 6, 7, 8 books, something like that. Because when
Mhm.
people did discover him when Wool came out, um, they had other stuff they could buy, and he wasn't under such pressure to get the next book out because he had a back catalog for them to go dig through while he worked on new content. The last thing you want to do is to erupt and become famous when you have one book. Uh,
Yeah.
and we've seen lots of authors that have done that, and then the pressure just sinks their career because everybody's staring at them, waiting for the follow up, and you just don't need that kind of pressure on you. But Tanya Kappas is an author that I've referenced a number of times. She's a cozy mystery writer, but when you land on her website, she's got books immediately right there. But she's got this link at the top, join my newsletter. And when you click that, um, she's got a couple of different ones you can sign up for. But she sends an email newsletter like twice a week. I think it's on Sunday and maybe Wednesday. And it's all about this kind of world that she's created. It's her world, but um it's just so fun. There's always news, but she's doing giveaways. She's got little funny stories from encounters that she's had. It's just it's refreshing in that it's a newsletter that you get, and you always want to open it to see what the next funny story is that she sent. And just a brilliant example of email marketing. Go sign up for Tanya's newsletter. Just read a couple. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe. But that's someone that is worth looking at to see how they do it.
Yeah. Now, again, we're gonna save this for a show in itself. You don't need to send 2 newsletters a week. In fact,
You
I
don't have
suggest
to.
you don't
Yeah.
until you're successful, like Tanya.
Until you're successful, or until you have something that people want to come read
Yep.
twice. They don't want to read emails twice a week about what your latest book is on sale. You can offer that information at the bottom after you've given them something that they truly want to see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about building a community. It's about building people who trust you and who want to hear from you. So yeah, big question. Sorry we only had a few minutes for it, but I think that will make for a good show, either in December, probably January. Let's be real. I feel like Hank and Robert and I are just going to crash in December. And I'll have an alarm set for noon or something. I'll wake up, I'll do 2 hours of work, and then I'll go back to bed.
Yeah, be a lot of snoring.
All right, with that, that's not serious. We will be here in December. We will be doing live events. But yeah, with that, we are going to call it here for this Q&A session. We have a pretty big week coming up next week. So as always, we have writing sprints at 12:30 p.m. Eastern every day except for Wednesday. But on Monday we have that. And then Robert and I are going to be chatting at 2 p.m. about what to do next after the 60-day novel challenge and NaNoWriMo are done. Then on Tuesday, again, writing sprint at 12:30, then 2 p.m. Eastern, we have a little wrap-up bonus show for the 60-day challenge where Hank, Josh, and I are going to be chatting about how the challenge went, how our progress is going, what we're thinking about with the books that we've been writing, and just seeing how everyone's challenge has been going.
Yeah.
Then Wednesday, Wednesday is the day, the marathon, the all-day writing sprint extravaganza.
Yeah.
It's going to be a great time.
Did we decide if we're gonna cycle in every hour at handoff?
I'm gonna say that now on stream so that Robert can't refute it, because I think that's the best way to do it.
And I second that. So Robert
so he's outvoted anyway.
Outvoted.
Yeah. So it'll be an hour. I feel like there's going to be overlap. Like I'll do an hour and then you'll come on and I'll hang around for like another sprint or something. And then I'll disappear for 2 hours. All right. And then on Thursday is American Thanksgiving. So it shall just be me, myself, and I on the writing sprint that day. And that is the only event we're having on Thursday. And then next Friday, again, I will be hosting writing sprints at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. But then at 2 p.m., I will be hosting another live stream where it will just be a wrap-up event for all of this crazy writing to be done, kind of. It's on the 29th, so you have one more day of it, but it's a wrap-up event. And so lots going on next week.
100%. Have fun, everybody. Get those words in this weekend. If you don't get those words in, come Wednesday and put in the work. We'll be here with you.
We'll give you a verbal lashing. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.